The morning of King Charles's coronation dawned crisp and clear over London. Inside Kensington Palace, Catherine Middleton stood before an enormous mirror as her team of stylists made final adjustments to her breathtaking ensemble. The Alexander McQueen gown flowed like liquid silk around her figure, its ivory fabric catching the soft light streaming through the tall windows. But it was the jewelry that truly took everyone's breath away. Sapphires and diamonds adorned her neck in a magnificent necklace that had once belonged to Princess Diana. The matching earrings sparkled like captured starlight against her dark hair, which had been styled in an elegant updo that would perfectly complement the formal tiara she would wear later. Royal jewelers had spent weeks selecting each piece, ensuring that Catherine would shine with the appropriate majesty befitting her future role as queen consort. Her personal dresser, Margaret, carefully lifted the final piece from its velvet case. The lover's knot tiara, another treasure from Diana's collection, would complete the look. As Margaret positioned it on Catherine's head, adjusting each diamond to catch the morning light perfectly, she noticed something that made her pause. "Your Royal Highness," Margaret said softly, her voice carrying a note of confusion. "There appears to be a small brooch on your gown that I don't recall placing there." Catherine's hand moved instinctively to her left shoulder, where a delicate silver brooch sat quietly among all the grand jewelry. The piece was small and simple, made of what appeared to be ordinary silver with tiny pearls arranged in a flower pattern. Compared to the millions of pounds worth of royal jewels she wore, it looked almost humble, like a wildflower growing in a garden of roses. "Oh, that," Catherine said, her voice carrying an emotion that Margaret couldn't quite identify. "I placed it there myself this morning. It's exactly where it needs to be." Margaret studied the brooch more carefully. It was clearly old, perhaps from several decades past, and showed signs of gentle wear. The silver had a soft patina that spoke of years of careful handling, and the small pearls, while genuine, were not the lustrous perfection of the crown jewels. Yet something about the way Catherine touched it, the tender way her fingers traced its outline, suggested this simple piece held meaning far beyond its modest appearance. "Shall I perhaps move it to a less prominent position?" Margaret asked diplomatically. "It might blend better with the overall design if placed lower on the gown." "No," Catherine replied firmly, but with a gentle smile that softened her words. "It stays exactly where it is. Some things are more important than perfect design." As Catherine made her way to the waiting car, other members of the royal household began to take notice of the unusual addition to her ensemble. Lady Sarah, one of her ladies-in-waiting, whispered quietly to her colleague about the mysterious brooch. Even the usually composed royal photographer raised an eyebrow as he captured the final portraits before departure. The ride to Westminster Abbey was filled with the usual pre-ceremony tension, but Catherine seemed unusually calm. William, resplendent in his military uniform, noticed her touching the small brooch repeatedly during the journey. He had seen her wear it only once before, years ago during a private family gathering, but he recognized the gesture and understood its significance without needing to ask. "Are you ready for this?" William asked, taking her hand as their car approached the ancient abbey. Catherine looked down at the brooch once more, then smiled with a confidence that seemed to radiate from within. "I've never been more ready," she said. Outside Westminster Abbey, thousands of people lined the streets, their cameras and phones ready to capture every detail of the historic day. Fashion experts from around the world had positioned themselves strategically to analyze and critique every aspect of the royal couple's appearance. They were prepared to discuss the provenance of each jewel, the designer of each garment, and the historical significance of every accessory. As Catherine stepped from the car, the crowd erupted in cheers. The morning sun caught her tiara and necklace, sending prismatic rainbows dancing across the ancient stones of the abbey. Photographers clicked furiously, capturing image after image of what would surely be remembered as one of the most elegant royal appearances in modern history. But it was the sharp-eyed royal watchers, those dedicated followers who studied every royal appearance with the intensity of detectives, who first noticed something unusual. Sarah Mitchell, a blogger who had covered royal fashion for over a decade, was among the first to spot the anomaly. "Do you see that brooch?" she whispered urgently to her photographer, the small silver one on her left shoulder. "I don't recognize it from any of the royal collections." Her photographer adjusted his telephoto lens, zooming in on the delicate piece. "It's definitely not matching the rest of her jewelry," he confirmed. "Looks almost vintage, maybe from the 1940s or 1950s. Word spread quickly through the crowd of royal watchers. Text messages flew between fashion journalists and royal correspondents. Within minutes, the question was being asked in multiple languages. "What is that brooch Catherine is wearing?" Inside the abbey, as Catherine and William made their way down the aisle, the television cameras captured every angle of their progress. Millions of viewers around the world watched the ceremony, many of them fashion enthusiasts, eager to identify and discuss every element of the royal couple's appearance. Television commentators, prepared with extensive notes about the expected royal jewels, found themselves stumped by the small silver brooch. we can see the princess is wearing several pieces from the late Princess Diana's collection. One expert explained to viewers, but there appears to be an addition that we weren't expecting to see today. Social media exploded with speculation. Fashion blogs posted close-up images of the brooch, asking readers to help identify its origins. Royal jewelry experts were consulted, but none could place the piece within any known royal collection. The mystery deepened when searches through historical photographs of royal events failed to turn up any previous appearances of the brooch. Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, a leading expert on royal jewelry, was contacted by several news outlets during the ceremony. "It's certainly unusual," she admitted over the phone while watching the live broadcast. "The royal family typically chooses pieces that have historical significance or clear provenance. This brooch doesn't appear in any of the major royal jewelry catalogs I'm familiar with." The speculation grew more intense as the ceremony continued. Some suggested it might be a new piece, commissioned specially for the occasion. Others wondered if it could be a family heirloom from Catherine's own background, though this would be highly unusual for such a formal royal event. Meanwhile, Catherine moved through the ancient ceremony with grace and dignity, seemingly unaware of the buzz her small brooch was creating. She sang hymns, listened to prayers, and participated in the traditional rituals that had marked such occasions for centuries. But throughout it all, her hand occasionally moved to touch the simple silver brooch, as if drawing strength from its presence. The ceremony concluded with the majestic recessional. Catherine and William walking back down the aisle as newly confirmed members of the next generation of monarchs. The cameras followed their every step, and with each image, the questions about the mysterious brooch grew more insistent. As the royal couple emerged from the abbey into the bright afternoon sunlight, the brooch caught the light once more. This time, even the casual observers in the crowd began to notice the small silver piece that seemed so different from everything else Catherine wore. By evening, the brooch had become the subject of intense discussion across all forms of media. Fashion magazines promised to investigate its origins. Royal biographers began searching through their archives. Jewelry historians offered theories about its possible significance. But inside the palace, as Catherine carefully removed her formal jewelry at the end of the long day, she held the small brooch in her palm for a long moment before placing it gently in her personal jewelry box. Whatever secret it held, whatever meaning it carried, she wasn't ready to share it with the world. The mystery of Catherine's coronation brooch had captured the public imagination, but the truth behind its presence remained locked away with the woman who had chosen to wear it on one of the most important days of her life. The morning after the coronation, newspapers across Britain and around the world featured stunning photographs of Catherine and William from the historic ceremony. But alongside the expected headlines about royal tradition and pageantry, a different story was emerging. Fashion editors and royal correspondents found themselves fielding countless calls and emails about one small detail that had captured the public imagination. At the offices of Royal Heritage magazine in central London, senior editor Victoria Ashworth stared at the high-resolution photographs spread across her desk. She had covered royal events for 15 years, and her trained eye could identify nearly every piece in the crown jewels collection. But the small silver brooch on Catherine's gown remained a complete mystery. "I've called every royal jewelry expert I know," Victoria told her assistant, James, as he brought her morning coffee. "No one can identify this piece. It's not in any of the official royal collections, and it doesn't appear in any historical photographs from previous coronations or state occasions." James leaned over the photographs, studying the brooch through a magnifying glass. "The craftsmanship looks good, but it's definitely not made by any of the major royal jewelers. See how the pearls are set. It's more like something you'd find in a family jewelry box than in a palace vault." Victoria nodded, making notes in her leather-bound notebook. "That's exactly what's so intriguing about it. Everything else Catherine wore can be traced back through generations of royal history. But this little brooch, it's like it appeared from nowhere." Meanwhile, across the city at the British Museum, Dr. Margaret Thornfield was experiencing her own moment of professional confusion. As one of the country's leading experts on historical jewelry, she had been contacted by 3 different television programs and 2 major newspapers, all asking her to identify Catherine's mysterious brooch. Dr. Thornfield had spent the previous evening examining every available photograph of the brooch, using her decades of experience to analyze its construction, materials, and style. Her preliminary assessment suggested it dated from the 1940s or early 1950s. But beyond that, she could offer little concrete information. "The design is certainly British," she explained to a journalist over the phone. "The flower motif with small pearls was popular during and just after the Second World War, but without being able to examine the piece directly, I can't determine its maker or provenance." The mystery deepened when royal biographer Charles Pemberton decided to investigate the brooch's possible connection to Catherine's own family history. Charles had written extensively about the modern royal family and had developed contacts throughout the extended networks of royal staff and associates. His first call was to retired palace valet Henry Morrison, who had served the royal household for over 30 years before retiring in 2019. Henry had an exceptional memory for details and had often helped journalists and biographers verify information about royal customs and possessions. "I've been looking at the photographs all morning," Henry told Charles over the phone from his cottage in the Cotswolds. "That brooch is definitely not part of any royal collection I'm familiar with. In all my years at the palace, I never saw anything quite like it during formal occasions." But Henry's next comment sent Charles in an entirely new direction. However, the retired valet continued, "I do remember seeing something similar years ago. It was during one of those informal family gatherings, maybe around 2015 or 2016. I can't quite place where or when exactly, but I have a feeling it was connected to Catherine's side of the family." This revelation prompted Charles to begin researching Catherine's family background more thoroughly. The Middleton family history was well documented, but Charles suspected that the brooch might have connections that hadn't been publicly explored. His research led him to contact several people who had known Catherine during her childhood and university years. Most were politely unhelpful, either not remembering any specific jewelry or being reluctant to discuss private family matters with a journalist. However, one contact proved more promising. Sarah Williams had been Catherine's friend at St. Andrews University and had remained close to the family over the years. When Charles called her, Sarah was initially hesitant to discuss anything about Catherine's private life. "I really don't think I should be talking about Catherine's personal belongings," Sarah said diplomatically, "but I will say that she's always been someone who values meaningful objects over expensive ones. Even at university, she had this way of treasuring things that other people might not notice." Sarah's comment, while not providing specific information about the brooch, suggested that Catherine's choice to wear it during the coronation was likely deeply personal rather than a fashion statement or royal protocol requirement. The investigation took another turn when royal photographer Amanda Clark decided to examine her extensive archive of royal event photographs. Amanda had been photographing royal occasions for over 20 years, and her archive contained thousands of images that had never been published. Working methodically through her files, Amanda searched for any previous appearance of the mysterious brooch. She examined photographs from Catherine's engagement announcement, wedding day, various state dinners, and dozens of other formal occasions. The brooch appeared in none of them, but Amanda's thorough search did reveal something interesting. In several informal photographs taken during family-oriented royal events, Catherine could be seen wearing simple, personal jewelry that didn't match her formal royal pieces. This suggested she made deliberate choices to honor personal connections. During certain occasions, Catherine has always been thoughtful about her jewelry choices, Amanda explained to a colleague. She often incorporates pieces that have personal meaning, especially during events that hold emotional significance for her. While the professional investigators struggled to identify the brooch, social media was buzzing with theories from amateur royal watchers. Dedicated followers of the royal family began sharing their own photographs and observations, hoping to solve the mystery through collective investigation. One particularly active group on a royal family discussion forum began analyzing every available image of the brooch from different angles. They noted details about the silver's patina, the size and arrangement of the pearls, and the style of the clasp mechanism. "This definitely looks like mid-20th century craftsmanship," posted user RoyalWatcher 247. "The style reminds me of jewelry my grandmother had from the 1940s. It's got that wartime elegance, beautiful but not flashy." Another user, HistoryBuff52, added their own analysis. "I've been comparing this to jewelry from that era, and it matches the style of pieces that were often given as gifts between family members. Not expensive enough for special occasions, but precious because of who gave them." These online discussions began to focus on the theory that the brooch was a family heirloom from Catherine's maternal or paternal relatives, possibly dating back to her grandparents' generation. The speculation reached a new level when retired teacher Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, living quietly in her Scottish cottage, happened to see a detailed photograph of the brooch in her morning newspaper. Mrs. Hartwell, now 73 years old, had spent 40 years teaching art at various schools throughout England before retiring to the Highlands. As she studied the photograph over her morning tea, something about the brooch stirred a memory. The flower design, the particular arrangement of the small pearls, the way the silver caught the light, it all seemed familiar, though she couldn't immediately place where she had seen it before. Mrs. Hartwell set down her teacup and retrieved a magnifying glass from her desk drawer. As she examined the photograph more closely, the memory began to crystallize. She had definitely seen this brooch before, many years ago, but the context remained frustratingly just beyond her recall. "I know I've seen this piece," she murmured to herself, her teacher's instincts telling her that the answer was important. But where and when? Meanwhile, Back in London, the investigation was expanding in multiple directions. Royal correspondents were contacting antique jewelry dealers, hoping to find similar pieces that might provide clues about the brooch's origins. Museum curators were searching their collections for comparable items from the same period. The mystery had captured public attention in a way that surprised even experienced royal watchers. The combination of the brooch's humble appearance among such grand royal jewels, Catherine's obvious attachment to it, and the complete lack of official information about its significance had created the perfect puzzle for royal enthusiasts to solve. As the second day after the coronation drew to a close, the brooch remained as mysterious as ever, but the investigation had established several important facts. The piece was definitely not part of any royal collection. It dated from the 1940s or early 1950s, and it clearly held deep personal significance for Catherine. The truth about the brooch's identity and meaning remained hidden, but the growing number of people working to solve the mystery suggested that answers might not be far away. Somewhere in the collective memory of those who had known Catherine throughout her life, the key to understanding her coronation secret was waiting to be discovered. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell could not sleep that night. The image of the small silver brooch from the newspaper photograph kept returning to her mind, bringing with it fragments of memories that felt important but remained frustratingly incomplete. She had been a teacher for 40 years, and her mind was trained to solve puzzles and make connections. This particular mystery felt personal somehow, as if the answer was connected to her own life story. At 3 in the morning, she gave up trying to sleep and made herself a cup of tea. She sat in her favorite armchair by the window, looking out at the Scottish hills bathed in moonlight. As she sipped the warm tea and let her mind wander, the memories began to arrange themselves more clearly. It was 1995. She suddenly remembered. She had been teaching at St. Andrew's School in Berkshire, a small but respected institution that served families from the surrounding area. Among her students that year was a bright, cheerful girl with dark hair and kind eyes. Catherine Middleton had been 8 years old enough to be away from home for extended periods, but young enough to still need the comfort that only family could provide. Mrs. Hartwell remembered that Catherine had been different from many of her other students. While some children from well-off families could be demanding or spoiled, Catherine was always polite, helpful, and genuinely interested in learning. She had a particular talent for art and would often stay after class to work on projects or simply to chat about her latest drawings. The memory became clearer as Mrs. Hartwell continued to think. Catherine had missed several weeks of school that summer, which was unusual since most families took their holidays at more traditional times. When Catherine returned, she seemed quieter than usual, more thoughtful. Mrs. Hartwell had gently asked if everything was all right at home. "I spent the summer with my granny. Catherine had explained, her 8-year-old voice carrying a mixture of sadness and love. "She's very sick, but she taught me so many wonderful things about gardening and cooking and being strong." Mrs. Hartwell now remembered asking Catherine to tell her more about this special grandmother. The little girl had brightened immediately, eager to share stories about the woman who had clearly made such an impression on her. "Granny isn't like other grandmothers," Catherine had said, settling into her chair with the serious expression children sometimes wore when discussing important matters. "She doesn't have a big house or fancy things, but she knows everything about flowers and birds and making people feel better when they're sad." Catherine had gone on to describe the small cottage where her grandmother lived, with its beautiful garden and cozy rooms filled with books and family photographs. She talked about learning to bake bread, about morning walks through meadows, and about evening conversations by the fireplace when her grandmother would share stories about the family's history. Mrs. Hartwell remembered being touched by Catherine's obvious love for this grandmother. In her decades of teaching, she had learned to recognize when children formed especially deep bonds with family members. Catherine's relationship with Granny clearly fell into this category, but it was what happened next that connected to the coronation brooch mystery. Mrs. Hartwell's memory suddenly became crystal clear as she recalled a specific afternoon in early September 1995. Catherine had arrived at school that day, wearing a small silver brooch on her school cardigan. It was unusual for students to wear jewelry beyond simple earrings or watches, but Mrs. Hartwell had noticed the piece because Catherine kept touching it throughout the day, as if drawing comfort from its presence. During art class, Mrs. Hartwell had complimented Catherine on the pretty brooch. The 8-year-old had looked down at it with an expression of such deep emotion that it had surprised her teacher. "It was my Granny Catherine had said quietly. "She gave it to me just before I left her house. She said it belonged to her mother, and her mother before that. She told me that someday, when I was grown up and facing something really important, I should wear it to remember that I come from strong women." Mrs. Hartwell had been moved by the child's serious tone and the obvious significance of the gift. She had asked Catherine to tell her more about the brooch's history. "Granny said her mother wore it during the war," Catherine had explained, her small fingers tracing the delicate flower pattern. When times were really hard and scary, she would touch this brooch and remember that beautiful things still existed in the world. The little pearls are like dewdrops on a flower, she said. Even when everything else is dark, there's still beauty if you know where to look for it. The story had touched Mrs. Hartwell deeply, and she had made a mental note to keep an eye on Catherine, understanding that the child was processing some difficult emotions related to her grandmother's illness. Over the following weeks, Catherine had worn the brooch to school several more times, always on days when she seemed to need extra comfort or confidence. Mrs. Hartwell had observed how the child would unconsciously touch the brooch during challenging moments, whether she was giving a presentation to the class or dealing with typical childhood social situations. The memory became even more poignant as Mrs. Hartwell recalled what happened later that autumn. Catherine had arrived at school one October morning with red-rimmed eyes and a subdued demeanor. When Mrs. Hartwell had gently inquired, Catherine had whispered that Granny Dot had died peacefully in her sleep. She wasn't in pain anymore, Catherine had said with the brave acceptance that children sometimes showed in the face of loss. And she told me that whenever I missed her, I should look at the brooch and remember all the stories she taught me. Mrs. Hartwell had offered comfort as best she could, and she had noticed that Catherine wore the silver brooch more frequently in the weeks following her grandmother's death. The 8-year-old seemed to draw strength from the connection to her beloved Granny Dot. Now, 28 years later, sitting in her Scottish cottage in the early morning hours, Mrs. Hartwell finally understood the significance of seeing that same brooch at the coronation ceremony. Catherine had worn her grandmother's precious gift during one of the most important moments of her life, just as Granny Dot had suggested she might someday do. The realization brought tears to Mrs. Hart's eyes. She thought about the 8-year-old girl who had treasured her grandmother's simple silver brooch, and the poised woman who had become a future queen while still honoring the memory of the woman who had shaped her character during that crucial summer. Mrs. Hartwell understood now why Catherine had seemed so calm and confident during the coronation ceremony. She had been carrying not just a piece of jewelry, but the love, wisdom, and strength of the grandmother who had believed in her potential long before the world knew her name. The former teacher felt a deep sense of privilege at having witnessed this connection between past and present. She had been present during the beginning of Catherine's relationship with the brooch, and now she had seen its significance come full circle during one of the most watched royal ceremonies in recent history. As the Scottish dawn began to break over the hills outside her window, Mrs. Hartwell made a decision. The mystery of Catherine's coronation brooch deserved to be solved, and she was perhaps the only person who could provide the missing piece of the puzzle. She had kept detailed records of her teaching years, including notes about students who had made particular impressions on her. Somewhere in her organized files, she was certain she would find more specific details about Catherine's time at St. Andrew's School and the story of Granny Dot's precious gift. Mrs. Hartwell spent the morning going through boxes of carefully preserved school records, photographs, and personal notes from her teaching career. In a folder labeled 1995-1996 academic year, she found exactly what she was looking for. There was a photograph from the school's autumn art exhibition showing Catherine standing proudly next to a watercolor painting of a garden scene. In the photograph, the silver brooch was clearly visible on Catherine's cardigan, catching the light just as it had during the coronation ceremony decades later. But more importantly, Mrs. Hartwell found her own handwritten notes about Catherine's family situation during that difficult period. The notes confirmed her memories and provided additional details about Granny Dot's influence on young Catherine's character development. Mrs. Hartwell realized that she held the key to solving the mystery that had captivated royal watchers around the world. The question now was whether she should share this private family story with the public, or find a way to let Catherine know that someone remembered and understood the deep significance of her coronation choice. The brooch represented so much more than a simple piece of jewelry. It was a bridge between generations, a symbol of enduring love, and a reminder that the most precious gifts often come not from palaces or treasure vaults, but from the hearts of ordinary people who shape extraordinary lives through their wisdom and devotion. Mrs. Hartwell sat at her small wooden desk for hours, staring at the blank piece of paper before her. The morning sun had given way to afternoon clouds, and still she had not written a single word. How could she possibly explain to strangers the beautiful stories she had remembered about Catherine and her grandmother's brooch? More importantly, should she share such a private family memory with the world? The retired teacher had always believed that some stories belonged to the people who lived them, not to the curious public who wanted to know every detail about famous lives. But this story felt different somehow. It was not about scandal or secrets meant to embarrass anyone. Instead, it was about love, family bonds, and the simple human truth that everyone needs something to hold on to during difficult times. Finally, Mrs. Hartwell picked up her pen and began to write. She would contact the palace directly, she decided. If Catherine wanted the story to remain private, that would be her choice to make. But perhaps knowing that someone remembered and understood the significance of her coronation choice would bring her some Comfort. The letter took her 3 attempts to write properly. She wanted to strike the right tone, respectful but warm, informative but not intrusive. When she finally sealed the envelope and addressed it to Kensington Palace, Mrs. Hartwell felt a sense of peace about her decision. Meanwhile, 300 miles south in London, Catherine was dealing with the overwhelming response to the coronation ceremony. Thank you letters needed to be written, official photographs required approval, and countless meetings about future royal duties filled her calendar. But throughout the busy days following the ceremony, she found herself thinking often about the small silver brooch that had caused such public curiosity. She had not expected the brooch to attract so much attention. In her mind, it had been a private tribute to her grandmother, a way of feeling connected to the woman who had taught her so much about grace, strength, and staying true to oneself. The public fascination with the piece had surprised her. She understood why people were curious about anything that seemed unusual at such a formal royal event. William had noticed her touching the brooch frequently during their public appearances following the coronation. He understood the gesture completely, having heard countless stories about Granny Dot over the years of their relationship. He knew how much Catherine missed her grandmother and admired the way she had chosen to honor that memory during such an important moment. Are you going to tell them about the brooch? William asked one evening as they reviewed the day's official correspondence. Several interview requests had come in from major news organizations, all hoping to learn more about Catherine's jewelry choices during the coronation. Catherine looked up from the letters spread across her desk. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to keep it private, to let it remain just between Granny Dot and me. But another part of me thinks that maybe sharing her story could help other people understand the importance of family connections. William nodded thoughtfully. Whatever you decide, I'll support completely. But you know that Granny Dot would have been so proud to see you wearing her brooch during the coronation. Maybe she would have wanted people to know about the strong woman she was. Their conversation was interrupted by Catherine's private secretary, who brought in the day's personal mail. Among the usual assortment of congratulations, cards and official invitations was a handwritten envelope with a Scottish postmark. Something about the careful, old-fashioned handwriting caught Catherine's attention. She opened Mrs. Hartwell's letter immediately, drawn by the mention of St. Andrew's School in the first paragraph. As she read, her eyes widened with surprise, and then filled with tears. Someone had remembered, someone had understood. William, she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, you need to read this. William moved to sit beside her, reading over her shoulder as Catherine held the letter between them. Mrs. Hartwell had written beautifully about her memories of 18-year-old Catherine and the story of Granny Dot's brooch. She had included details that Catherine herself had almost forgotten. Moments from that difficult but precious time when her grandmother was dying. She remembers everything, Catherine whispered, wiping away a tear. The art class, the way I used to touch the brooch when I was nervous, even the picture I painted of Granny Dot's garden. The letter concluded with Mrs. Hartwell's gentle offer to share her memories with the palace or to keep them private, whatever Catherine preferred. She had also included the old photograph from the school art exhibition, showing young Catherine wearing the brooch with such obvious pride and love. Catherine stared at the photograph for a long time, remembering that autumn day when she had been so excited to show her artwork to visitors. She had worn Granny Dot's brooch because the painting was of her grandmother's garden, and she had wanted to feel close to her during the exhibition. This changes everything, Catherine said finally. Mrs. Hartwell has given us a gift. She's shown me that the story of the brooch isn't just my private memory anymore. It's become something bigger, something that could help other people understand the importance of family love and tradition. William squeezed her hand gently. So what do you want to do? Catherine was quiet for several minutes, thinking carefully about the decision before her. The public was clearly fascinated by the mystery of the brooch, and she had the power to satisfy their curiosity or to leave them wondering forever. But Mrs. Hartwell's letter had reminded her of something important that Granny Dot had always said. Granny Dot used to tell me that love grows stronger when it's shared, Catherine said slowly. She believed that keeping beautiful things to yourself made them smaller, but sharing them with others made them more powerful and meaningful. The next morning, Catherine called her communications team together for an emergency meeting. She had made her decision about the brooch mystery, and she wanted to handle the revelation in the most appropriate way possible. I want to share the story, she announced to the surprised group of advisors, but I want to do it in a way that honors my grandmother's memory and helps other people think about their own family connections. Her communications director, Sarah, leaned forward with interest. What did you have in mind, Your Royal Highness? Catherine had been thinking about this question since reading Mrs. Hartwell's letter. I want to establish a new royal initiative focused on strengthening family bonds, especially the relationships between grandparents and grandchildren. The brooch story will be the perfect way to launch this program. The room buzzed with excitement as the team began to understand Catherine's vision. This would not be just another interview about royal fashion or jewelry. Instead, it would be the beginning of a meaningful program that could help families across the country. recognize and celebrate the wisdom and love that older generations offer to younger ones. We'll need to contact Mrs. Hartwell first, Catherine continued. I want to invite her to London so I can thank her personally for preserving these memories and for reminding me of something important about sharing love and stories. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. This could be incredibly powerful, Your Royal Highness. The public has been so curious about the brooch, and now you can satisfy that curiosity while also launching something meaningful and lasting. Catherine felt a sense of rightness about the decision that she hadn't experienced since the coronation itself. She was going to share Granny.'s story with the world, not because she had to satisfy public curiosity, but because doing so would honor her grandmother's belief in the power of love and connection. The mystery of the coronation brooch was about to be solved, but more importantly, it was about to become the foundation for something much larger. Catherine was going to use her grandmother's simple gift to help strengthen families throughout the kingdom, turning a private memory into a public service. As she looked once more at the photograph Mrs. Hartwell had sent, showing her self wearing the precious brooch, Catherine knew that Granny would have approved completely of this decision. Love shared was love multiplied, just as her wise grandmother had always said. 3 months after the coronation, Kensington Palace was buzzing with activity as staff prepared for one of Catherine's most personal royal events yet. The launch of the Generations Together initiative would take place in the palace's beautiful orangery, with carefully selected guests representing families from across the United Kingdom. Mrs. Hartwell had arrived in London the evening before, staying at a comfortable hotel near the palace. At 73 years old, she had never imagined she would be a guest at a royal event, but Catherine had insisted that her former teacher be present for this special announcement. The two women had spoken on the phone several times since Mrs. Hartwell's letter, and Catherine had been deeply moved by the older woman's clear memories of that difficult but important time in her childhood. As morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the orangery, Catherine stood quietly in her private dressing room, preparing for the day ahead. On the table before her lay several pieces of jewelry, including the magnificent royal pieces she often wore for official events. But her attention was focused on one small item, Granny's silver brooch. William entered the room and saw her holding the delicate piece. Are you ready for this? He asked gently, understanding the emotional significance of what she was about to do. Catherine nodded, pinning the brooch carefully to her navy blue dress. I think Granny would have loved this day, she said softly. She always believed that sharing stories made them more powerful, and today her story is going to help so many other families. The guest list for the event had been carefully chosen to represent the diversity of modern British families. There were grandparents who had raised their grandchildren, children who had been inspired by elderly neighbors, and families who had overcome difficulties through the support of older relatives. Each guest had a story about the importance of intergenerational relationships. Among the guests were several families who had particularly moved Catherine during the planning process. The Johnson family from Manchester included 8-year-old Sophie and her 90-year-old great-grandmother Rose, who had taught Sophie to knit and shared stories about surviving the London Blitz. The Patels from Birmingham brought their teenage son Dev, who credited his grandfather with helping him develop confidence in public speaking and academic achievement. There was also the Williams family from Wales, where 12-year-old Emma had learned traditional baking techniques from her grandmother after her parents' divorce, finding comfort and stability in their weekly cooking sessions. These stories reminded Catherine of her own relationship with Granny. And reinforced her belief that the initiative could make a real difference in people's lives. As the guests gathered in the orangery, Catherine made her way through the crowd, speaking personally with each family. She listened to their stories, asked about their experiences, and shared her own appreciation for the wisdom that older generations could offer to younger ones. When she reached Mrs. Hartwell, Catherine took both of the older woman's hands in her own. Thank you, she said simply. Thank you for remembering, and for helping me understand that some stories are meant to be shared. Mrs. Hartwell's eyes filled with tears. Your grandmother would be so proud of you today, she replied. She always knew you would do something special with your life, but I don't think even she could have imagined this. The formal presentation began with Catherine standing at a small podium in the center of the room. Behind her was a large photograph from her coronation day showing her wearing all her magnificent royal jewelry, including the small silver brooch that had sparked so much curiosity and speculation. 3 months ago, Catherine began, her voice clear and confident. Many of you noticed a small silver brooch that I wore during the coronation ceremony. Today, I want to share the story behind that brooch and explain why it represents something I believe is crucial for families throughout our country. The room fell completely silent as Catherine began to tell the story of Granny. She spoke about the summer when she was 8 years old, spending precious time with her dying grandmother. In a small cottage surrounded by beautiful gardens, she described learning about strength, resilience, and finding beauty even during difficult times. My grandmother Dorothy was not wealthy, Catherine continued, her hand moving unconsciously to touch the brooch. She didn't have grand houses or expensive possessions, but she had something far more valuable: the wisdom that comes from a life well lived, and the ability to pass that wisdom on to the next generation. Catherine went on to explain how Granny Dot had given her the brooch with specific instructions to wear it during important moments when she needed to remember her strength and heritage. She told me that the brooch had belonged to strong women in our family, and that someday it would help me face whatever challenges life brought. The audience was completely captivated as Catherine described wearing the brooch to school after her grandmother's death, drawing comfort from the connection to the woman who had shaped her character during those crucial weeks. Several guests wiped away tears as they recognized their own experiences in Catherine's story. "When I put on this brooch on Coronation Day," Catherine said, "I wasn't just wearing a piece of jewelry. I was carrying with me all the love, wisdom, and strength that my grandmother had given me. In one of the most overwhelming moments of my life, she was still there with me, still helping me be brave." Catherine then announced the details of the Generations Together initiative. The program would provide resources and support for families wanting to strengthen bonds between different generations. There would be storytelling workshops where grandparents could share family histories, skill-sharing sessions where older adults could teach traditional crafts or cooking techniques, and support groups for families dealing with illness or loss. "Every family has stories like mine," Catherine explained. "Every family has wisdom that deserves to be preserved and shared." This initiative will help families recognize and celebrate these precious connections. The program would also include a special component honoring family heirlooms and their stories. Families would be invited to share photographs and stories of meaningful objects that had been passed down through generations, creating a national archive of family treasures and the love they represented. Mrs. Hartwell was invited to speak briefly about her memories of young Catherine and the importance of teachers recognizing when students are processing difficult emotions. Her gentle words about the power of paying attention to children's needs and providing support during challenging times resonated deeply with the audience. The event concluded with Catherine announcing that she would continue wearing Granny Dot's brooch to important royal occasions, making it a symbol of the initiative and a reminder that family love and wisdom should be celebrated alongside more formal traditions. "This brooch will travel with me to schools, hospitals, community centers, and other places where families gather," Catherine promised. "It will serve as a reminder that the most precious gifts we can give each other are not material things, but love, attention, and the stories that connect us to who we are and where we come from." As the guests prepared to leave, many of them approached Catherine to share their own stories about meaningful family objects and relationships. The initiative had already begun to fulfill its purpose, encouraging people to think more deeply about their own family connections and the ways they could strengthen and celebrate them. That evening, as Catherine carefully placed the brooch back in her jewelry box, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction about the day's events. The mystery that had captivated the public after the coronation had been solved, but more importantly, it had become the foundation for something meaningful and lasting. The small silver brooch that had once comforted a grieving girl had now inspired a national conversation about the importance of family bonds and intergenerational relationships. Granny Dot's simple gift of love and wisdom had grown into something far larger than anyone could have imagined. In the months that followed, the Generations Together initiative would help thousands of families strengthen their relationships, preserve their stories, and recognize the precious value of the wisdom that older generations offer to younger ones. The coronation brooch had revealed its secret, and in doing so, had created a legacy that would honor family love for generations to come.